The year was 2247, and Earth had finally made contact with alien life. The Dominion controlled a vast region of space, and they had sent a delegation to assess whether humanity was worthy of joining their coalition. Commander Daniel Shaw stood in the observation room of the Geneva military complex and watched the alien ships descend through the clouds. He had spent 30 years in the military and had seen many things, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. Ambassador Martinez joined him at the window. She was a calm woman in her 50s who had spent her entire career preparing humanity for this day. She looked at Shaw and said that they needed to make a good impression. Shaw nodded but said nothing. He had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. The delegation was led by High Assessor, a tall creature with 4 arms and large compound eyes. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed himself superior to everyone around him. His team consisted of 6 other aliens from different species, all of them looking at the human facilities with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open contempt. Ambassador Martinez greeted them with a warm smile and welcomed them to Earth, clicked his mandibles and said that they were here to determine if humans had evolved beyond their primitive origins. Martinez kept her smile fixed in place and said that she hoped they would find humanity worthy of consideration. The tour began in the Weapons Development Center. Shaw had argued against showing the aliens their military technology, but the Council had insisted. They wanted to see what humans were capable of before making any decisions about membership. Shaw walked beside and explained the various systems on display. They stopped in front of a prototype. Shaw explained that it could fire a tungsten projectile at tremendous speeds and could punch through several meters of steel, made a sound that might have been laughter. He said that his people had abandoned such crude weapons thousands of years ago. He asked if humans still threw rocks at each other as well. The other aliens joined in the mockery. One of them, a reptilian creature with blue scales, said that projectile weapons were the mark of an uncivilized species. Another, a being made of what looked like living crystal, said that any species still using explosives and kinetic force had not truly evolved. Martinez tried to redirect the conversation, but was not finished. He ordered one of his assistants to demonstrate weapons technology. The assistant produced a small device that looked like a silver rod. He pointed it at a target dummy across the room and pressed a button. There was no sound and no visible beam, but the dummy simply stopped functioning. Its electronic components were completely dead. Explained that weapons used energy disruption fields. They could disable any target without causing physical damage. He said that civilized species did not tear flesh or break bones. They neutralized threats cleanly and efficiently. He looked at the human weapons with obvious disgust and said that missiles and bullets were the tools of savages. Shaw remained silent throughout the demonstration. He watched and listened and made mental notes. Martinez noticed the look in his eyes and knew that he was thinking something important, but she could not ask him in front of their guests. The tour continued for 3 more days. They examined everything from infantry rifles to nuclear submarines. At every stop, they found something to criticize. They called human tanks inefficient. They called aircraft carriers wasteful. They called the entire concept of conventional warfare barbaric and outdated. On the final day, delivered his assessment. He stood before a gathering of human leaders and announced that Earth would be granted provisional observer status in the Dominion. This meant that humanity would be allowed to watch and learn from their betters, but would not have a vote in council matters. He said that perhaps in a few centuries, when humans had abandoned their primitive ways, they might be considered for full membership. Martinez accepted the decision with grace. She thanked for his consideration and promised that humanity would work to meet standards. The alien delegation departed the next morning, leaving behind a world that felt smaller and more vulnerable than ever before. That evening, Shaw met with Martinez in her private office. He told her that they had made a serious mistake. Martinez asked what he meant. Shaw explained that they had shown humanity all of their technology. They had demonstrated how their weapons worked, how their shields functioned, and how their ships were designed. But they had never once asked humans a simple question. Martinez waited for him to continue. Shaw said that they never asked why humans still used kinetic weapons. They assumed it was because humanity was primitive and had not discovered anything better. They never considered that humans might have developed energy weapons and then rejected them. They never wondered if there might be a reason that Earth's military still relied on bullets and bombs. Martinez understood immediately. She asked Shaw if he was saying that human weapons might actually be more effective. Shaw said that he did not know for certain, but he suspected that they had never faced an enemy that fought the way humans did. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons. Their armor was built to resist disruption fields, but he had not seen anything that could stop a simple piece of metal traveling at high speed. Martinez asked what they should do with this information. Shaw said that for now, they should do nothing. They should accept their place as observers and watch and learn, but they should also prepare for the day when someone might test the defenses. And when that day came, humanity would be ready to show the galaxy what primitive weapons could really do. Martinez nodded slowly. She looked out her window at the stars and wondered what the future would bring. The thought they understood humanity, but they had only seen what humans wanted them to see. The truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous. Shaw left her office and walked through the quiet corridors of the diplomatic building. He thought about all the wars humanity had fought against itself over thousands of years. He thought about the weapons they had created and the tactics they had developed. They called them savages, but Shaw knew better. Humans were survivors. They had clawed their way to the top of their food chain and then reached for the stars. And no alien empire was going to look down on them for long. 6 months passed since the assessment. Humanity had settled into its role as observers and had begun establishing colonies on frontier worlds under supervision. One such colony was New Haven, a small settlement on the edge of Dominion space. It was home to 12,000 humans who had come seeking new opportunities among the stars. Lieutenant Karen Cole stood on the watchtower and looked out at the purple sky of her new home. She was 28 years old and had served in the Marines for 6 years before volunteering for colonial defense duty. The work was mostly boring, but she preferred the quiet life on the frontier to the politics of Earth. She checked her rifle out of habit, even though she knew they disapproved of such weapons. Governor Price walked up the stairs to join her. He was a former engineer in his 50s who had helped design and build most of the colony's infrastructure. He asked Cole if everything was quiet. She said that the outer sensors had picked up some unusual activity near the asteroid belt, but the patrol ships had dismissed it as space debris. Price frowned and said that he did not trust them to take their security seriously. Cole agreed, but said there was nothing they could do. Fleet Commander Han was in charge of the sector, and he made it clear that humans were not to interfere with military matters. Their job was to farm and build and stay out of the way. The first attack came 3 days later. A group of raiders struck the mining outpost on the colony's northern edge. They killed 4 workers and destroyed the processing equipment before disappearing into the wilderness. Cole led a response team to the site and found evidence that the attackers were not bandits. The weapons burns on the walls were consistent with military-grade equipment. She reported her findings to Commander Han aboard his flagship in orbit. The officer was a slender being with skin and large black eyes. He listened to Cole's report with obvious boredom and said that he would increase patrols in the area. He told her not to worry because the Dominion's shields would protect them from any serious threat. Cole wanted to argue but knew it would be pointless. She returned to the colony and met with Governor Price in his office. She told him that something was wrong and that they needed to prepare for a larger attack. Price asked what she had in mind. Cole said they should open the emergency armory and distribute weapons to the civilian population. Price hesitated. that had forbidden humans from maintaining large stockpiles of kinetic weapons. They said it was for everyone's safety, but Cole suspected they simply did not want armed humans on their border. However, Price had quietly ignored the order and kept a hidden cache of rifles, shotguns, grenades, and ammunition in a bunker beneath the government building. He had told himself it was just a precaution, but now it seemed like that precaution might save lives. Before they could make a decision, the alarms began to sound. Cole ran to the command center and saw the tactical display lighting up with hostile contacts. Dozens of ships were emerging from behind the local moon. They bore the markings of the hegemony, a rival empire that had been probing territory for years. Commander Hand's voice came over the communication system. He told the colonists to remain calm and said that his fleet would handle the situation. Cole watched the display as the ships moved to intercept the attackers. She expected a quick victory, but what she saw instead filled her with dread. The ships fired first. Instead of energy weapons, they launched strange devices that attached themselves to the hulls. Moments later, the Dominion's famous shields began to flicker and fail. The devices were designed to overload and collapse energy barriers, something they had never encountered before. Without their shields, the ships were vulnerable. They opened fire with concentrated beams that tore through unprotected armor. Within an hour, half of Hand's fleet was destroyed. The commander himself barely escaped in a damaged cruiser, retreating to a safe distance while issuing desperate calls for reinforcements. Cole did not wait for orders. She gathered her security team and told Price to open the armory. The governor did not hesitate this time. He led them down to the bunker and unsealed the heavy doors. Inside were enough weapons to arm every adult in the colony. Hand's voice crackled over the radio. He demanded to know what the humans were doing. He said that kinetic weapons were forbidden and that they were violating Dominion protocols. Cole picked up the communicator and told him that his protocols had just gotten half his fleet destroyed. She said that they were coming and that she would not let her people die because of alien rules. The officer sputtered with outrage, but Cole turned off the radio. She had more important things to worry about. The tactical display showed landing craft descending toward the colony. They would be on the ground within the hour. Price organized the distribution of weapons while Cole briefed the civilian volunteers. Most of them had never held a gun before, but they learned quickly. Fear was an excellent teacher. Cole showed them how to load, aim, and fire. She showed them how to take cover and how to work as a team. By the time the first soldiers appeared on the horizon, New Haven was ready. The aliens expected to find helpless civilians cowering in their homes. Instead, they found a colony that had teeth. Cole looked at her people and felt a surge of pride. They were farmers and engineers and teachers, but today they would be warriors. She raised her rifle and waited for the enemy to come within range. They had no idea what they were walking into. They thought humans were primitives with useless weapons. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Warlord stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched the landing craft descend toward the human colony. He was a massive warrior with armored scales the color of dried blood and eyes that had seen 100 worlds burn. This mission was supposed to be simple: destroy the fleet, capture the colony, and use it as a staging ground for deeper raids into Dominion territory. The first part had gone perfectly. The shield disruptors had worked exactly as promised, and the ships had crumbled like paper. Now all that remained was to secure the ground. His officers told him that the colony had only a small security force equipped with primitive weapons. He laughed and said that this would be easier than hunting animals on his. Lieutenant Karen Cole watched the forces approach through her binoculars. She counted approximately 300 soldiers in the first wave, all of them wearing personal shield generators and carrying energy rifles. They moved with the confidence of warriors who had never lost a battle. She smiled grimly and gave the order to hold fire. Sergeant Victor was positioned at the western perimeter with a squad of 20 volunteers. He was a grizzled veteran in his late 40s who had fought in 3 different wars on Earth before joining the colonial program. He had spent the last few hours planting surprises for their guests. Now he crouched behind a barrier of sandbags and waited. They entered the outer settlement without resistance. They moved through empty streets and kicked down doors, finding nothing but abandoned buildings. A watched from orbit and frowned. He had expected at least some resistance. He ordered his troops to push forward toward the central district. The first explosion came without warning. A soldier stepped on a pressure plate and triggered a homemade mine packed with metal fragments. The blast killed him instantly and wounded 3 others nearby. Their shields, designed to deflect energy beams, did nothing to stop the shrapnel. Before the survivors could react, gunfire erupted from the surrounding buildings. Cole had positioned her best shooters on the rooftops with clear lines of fire. Their bullets punched through shields like they were not even there. The aliens had never encountered kinetic weapons before and had no defense against them. The first wave lost 40 soldiers in the opening minutes of the battle. The survivors fell back in confusion, dragging their wounded with them. A watched the chaos from his ship and felt something he had not experienced in decades: uncertainty. He ordered a second assault with twice as many troops. This time they advanced more carefully, scanning for traps and keeping their heads down. But Cole had anticipated this. She had his team fall back slowly, drawing the enemy deeper into the colony where the streets were narrower and the buildings provided better cover. Dr. Lane had joined the defense effort in an unusual way. She was a who had spent years studying alien species, and she knew things about physiology that most humans did not. She told Cole that their exoskeletons were strong against cutting and piercing damage, but they were vulnerable to concussive force. A bullet might not penetrate their armor, but the impact could still shatter bones underneath. Cole used this information to adapt their tactics. She had the volunteers switch to heavier weapons and aim for center mass instead of trying to find weak points. She also ordered the construction of improvised explosive devices using materials from the mining operation. The results were devastating. The second wave lost nearly 100 soldiers before retreating. A was furious. He demanded to know how primitive savages with ancient weapons were defeating his elite warriors. His officers had no answers. They had never trained to fight an enemy like this. The siege lasted 3 days. Each assault cost them more casualties, while the human defenders used the terrain and their knowledge of the colony to stay one step ahead. Led guerrilla raids at night, striking supply lines and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Lane identified additional weaknesses in equipment that allowed the defenders to sabotage enemy vehicles and communication devices. Governor Price kept the civilian population organized and calm. He rationed food and water, tended to the wounded, and made sure everyone understood that their survival depended on working together. The people of New Haven had never been soldiers, but they fought like they had been doing it their whole lives. On the 3rd day, finally lost his patience. He had already lost a third of his ground forces and had nothing to show for it. He called for reinforcements from the main fleet and announced that he would personally lead the final assault. His remaining soldiers would attack from all directions at once, overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers. Cole knew they could not survive another major attack. They were running low on ammunition, and their barricades were crumbling. She gathered her officers and told them that they had one chance. They needed to get word to Earth about what was happening and hope that help would arrive in time. She recorded a message describing everything they had learned about fighting the. She explained that kinetic weapons were effective against their shields and that explosives could damage their armor. She uploaded the message to an emergency beacon and launched it into space, hoping it would reach human territory before they could intercept it. As she watched the beacon disappear into the stars, Cole felt a hand on her shoulder. stood beside her with a tired smile. He said that they had done everything they could. Now it was up to Earth. Cole nodded and picked up her rifle. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing up. In orbit, Commander Han watched the battle from his damaged cruiser. He had expected the humans to be slaughtered within hours. Instead, they had held out for 3 days against a superior force. He did not understand how it was possible. They had dismissed human weapons as primitive and useless, but the evidence before his eyes told a different story. For the first time in his long career, Han began to wonder if his people had made a terrible mistake. Admiral sat in her office at the Luna Defense Station and read the message from New Haven for the 3rd time. The emergency beacon had arrived 6 hours ago, and its contents had sent shockwaves through the entire military command structure. A human colony was under siege, and they had failed to protect it. Was a woman in her early 60s with hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much war. She had commanded fleets during the resource conflicts of the 2220s and had helped design the secret shipbuilding program that Earth had hidden from its alien observers. The thought they knew everything about human military capabilities, but they had only seen what humanity wanted them to see. She activated her secure communication channel and issued orders to 12 ships that officially did not exist. The Relentless, the Defiance, the Ironclad, and 9 others powered up their engines and prepared to jump. Each vessel was armed with weapons that they had dismissed as primitive, that could accelerate tungsten slugs to a fraction of light speed, nuclear missiles with yields measured in megatons, kinetic bombardment systems that could drop metal rods from orbit with the force of small asteroids. Captain Samuel Torr stood on the bridge of the Relentless and felt his heart racing. He was 40 years old and had spent his entire career preparing for a moment that he thought would never come. His crew was ready, his weapons were loaded, and his target was clear. He gave the order to jump, and the stars outside his window blurred into streaks of light. Back on Earth, High Assessor had arrived demanding answers. He stormed into the diplomatic building where Ambassador Martinez was waiting and demanded to know why humans had concealed military assets from the Dominion. His compound eyes blazed with anger as he accused humanity of deception and treachery. Commander Daniel Shaw stepped forward before Martinez could respond. He was calm and composed, his hands clasped behind his back. He told that humanity had never lied to them. They had never claimed to have no military forces. They had simply allowed the Dominion to make assumptions and had not corrected them. Sputtered with outrage, he demanded to know how this was different from lying. Shaw said that during the assessment 6 months ago, they had toured human facilities and seen human weapons. They had dismissed everything as primitive and useless. Not once had they asked if humans had anything else. Not once had they inquired about capabilities beyond what was shown. Shaw continued, his voice steady. He said that any species advanced enough for interstellar travel should have understood the value of kinetic weapons. The physics were simple. A mass traveling at high velocity carried enormous energy. It did not matter whether that mass was propelled by gunpowder or electromagnetic rails. The principle was the same. He asked a question. Why had they abandoned kinetic weapons? Said it was because they were crude and uncivilized. Energy weapons were cleaner and more elegant. Shaw nodded and said that was exactly the problem. They had made a choice based on aesthetics rather than effectiveness. They had forgotten that the purpose of a weapon was to destroy enemies, not to look impressive. Martinez intervened before the argument could escalate. She told that human ships were already on their way to New Haven. She said that they would deal with the threat and then discuss the implications. Protested that this was unacceptable, but there was nothing he could do. The ships had already jumped. Admiral's fleet arrived at New Haven 14 hours after departure. They emerged from hyperspace on the far side of the system and immediately began scanning for enemy contacts. The tactical display showed a grim picture. Reinforcements had arrived, bringing their total force to 30 warships and over 1,000 ground troops. Captain Torres reported that the Relentless was ready for combat, gave him command of the assault group, and told him to show what human weapons could do. Torres acknowledged the order and began his approach. They detected the incoming ships and moved to intercept. Warlord watched from his flagship and felt confident. His fleet outnumbered the humans more than 2-1. His shields were fully charged and his weapons were online. He gave the order to fire as soon as the enemy came within range. They opened up with concentrated energy beams that should have torn through any known hull material. But the human ships did not have conventional armor. They had thick plates of composite material backed by ablative layers designed to absorb and disperse energy. The beams scored their surfaces but failed to penetrate. Torres waited until his ships were at optimal range and then gave the order to fire. The Relentless shuddered as it's discharged. 8 tungsten slugs, each weighing several kilograms, accelerated to incredible speed and crossed the distance to the nearest ship in seconds. The shields were designed to disperse energy attacks. They had no effect on solid projectiles. The slugs punched through the shields without slowing and continued into the hull. They tore through bulkheads, destroyed critical systems, and exited through the other side, trailing debris and atmosphere. The first ship died in seconds. The second followed moments later. Torres ordered his squadron to spread out and engage multiple targets. The human ships were smaller and faster than their opponents, and their crews had trained for exactly this kind of combat. They tried to adapt but found themselves facing an enemy they did not understand. Their sensors could not track projectiles the way they tracked energy signatures. Their shields were useless. Their armor, designed to resist heat and radiation, crumpled under kinetic impacts. Admiral launched the second phase of the attack. Nuclear missiles streaked toward the formation. The warheads had no energy signature to detect and no propulsion system to target. They simply coasted through space until they reached their destinations and detonated. The explosions were silent in the vacuum but devastating in their effect. 3 more ships vanished in balls of nuclear fire. The remaining vessels began to scatter, their formation breaking apart as captains abandoned their warlord to save themselves. Watched his fleet dissolve and felt true fear for the first time in his life. He ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The Relentless had maneuvered behind his flagship and was charging its main. Torres aimed for the center of the vessel and fired a single shot. The tungsten slug traveled through space with perfect precision. It struck the command ship just below the bridge and continued through the entire length of the vessel. Everything in its path was destroyed instantly. The ship broke apart into 3 pieces and began tumbling toward the planet below. The Battle of New Haven was over in less than 2 hours. The entire fleet was destroyed or captured. Not a single human ship was lost. The news of the Battle of New Haven spread across the galaxy like wildfire. A species that the great powers had dismissed, as primitive savages, had destroyed an entire battle group in under 2 hours. Empires that had never given humanity a second thought suddenly found themselves paying very close attention. The hegemony sued for peace within a week. Their leaders had watched the combat recordings and understood that they faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Human weapons ignored shields. Human tactics were unpredictable. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that seemed almost irrational. The hegemony had no desire to continue a war they could not win. Admiral remained at New Haven to oversee the recovery efforts, while Captain Torres escorted the captured officers back to Dominion space. Lieutenant Corinne Cole finally had a chance to rest after the longest days of her life. She sat on the steps of the government building and watched the sun rise over a colony that had refused to die. Governor Price joined her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat down beside her. He said that he had never imagined anything like this when he signed up for the colonial program. Cole laughed and said that nobody could have imagined this. They had just changed the course of galactic history. The Dominion Council convened an emergency session. High Assessor stood before the assembled leaders and delivered a report that would reshape their understanding of the universe. He admitted that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation in their assessment of humanity. He explained that when his people abandoned kinetic weapons ago, they believed they were advancing toward a higher form of civilization. They developed energy weapons that were precise and elegant. They built shields that could deflect any attack. They convinced themselves that they had transcended the brutal physics of mass and velocity. But in doing so, they had created a blind spot. Their defenses were designed to counter energy attacks because that was all they expected to face. They had assumed that any species capable of interstellar travel would naturally evolve toward the same technologies. They never considered that a species might deliberately choose to retain older methods. The humans had not kept kinetic weapons because they were too primitive to develop anything better. They had kept them because kinetic weapons worked. Centuries of constant warfare on there had taught them that effectiveness mattered more than elegance. A bullet that killed the enemy was better than a beam that looked impressive but could be blocked. Ambassador Martinez addressed the council after finished. She stood before beings that had looked down on her species and spoke with quiet confidence. She said that humanity had not sought this conflict, but they had been prepared for it. They had watched them dismiss their capabilities and had said nothing because it was not in their interest to correct the mistake. She explained that human history was written in blood. For thousands of years, humans had fought each other with every tool they could create. They had developed weapons that were optimized for one purpose: killing effectively. This was not something to be proud of, but it was something that could not be ignored. The council debated for 3 days before reaching a decision. They voted unanimously to elevate humanity from observer status to full membership in the Dominion. More importantly, they formally requested that humans establish a training program to teach allied species how to defend against kinetic weapons. Admiral Daniel Shaw arrived on New Haven 2 weeks later to oversee the construction of the first interspecies combat school. He had been promoted after the battle and given authority to integrate human tactics into Dominion military doctrine. It was a task that would take years, but he was patient. Cole was assigned as one of the lead instructors. Her experience during the siege had made her famous throughout the Dominion, and alien officers traveled from across the galaxy to learn from her. She found it strange at first, teaching beings who had once dismissed her as a primitive savage, but she adapted, just as humans always did. Sergeant Victor retired from active duty and accepted a position training colonial militias. He said that he was too old for frontline combat, but the truth was that he had found something more important. Every colony in the Dominion would now have citizens who knew how to fight. The days of helpless victims waiting for rescue were over. Dr. Lane published her research on physiology and became the leading expert on alien vulnerabilities. Her work would save countless lives in the conflicts to come. She often said that knowledge was the most powerful weapon of all. 1 year after the battle, requested permission to visit New Haven. Cole met him at the landing pad and walked with him through the streets of the rebuilt colony. They stopped at the memorial that had been erected for the 63 humans who died during the siege. Stood in silence for a long time, his compound eyes reflecting the names carved in stone. He told Cole that he had spent his entire life believing that technology defined civilization. He had thought that any species still using kinetic weapons was simply too backward to know better. Now he understood that he had been wrong. Civilization was not about the tools you used. It was about what you were willing to do to protect your people. Cole said nothing. There was nothing that needed to be said. They walked to the edge of the colony where the first battle had taken place. The ground was still from the explosions, and spent bullet casings could still be found in the dirt. Bent down and picked up one of the casings. He turned it over in his four-fingered hands and marveled at its simplicity. a small piece of metal propelled by a chemical explosion. It was technology that humans had used for centuries. It should have been obsolete. It should have been useless against advanced alien warriors. Instead, it had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Put the casing in his pocket and told Cole that he would keep it as a reminder. She asked what it would remind him of. He said it would remind him that sometimes the oldest solutions were the deadliest. Sometimes the things that seemed primitive were actually the most dangerous of all. They walked back toward the colony as the sun began to set. In the distance, a diplomatic vessel was approaching Earth to begin negotiations. The empire that had once dismissed humanity now came seeking friendship and trade. The galaxy had learned a lesson that it would not soon forget. Humans were not primitives, they were survivors, and anyone who underestimated them did so at their own risk.